That's clear, that's in the prospect. Can I ask you about one other thing which you've made a decision about, and that is that there will be a budget at the end of October, and the Chancellor has already said that she won't raise national insurance rates for working people. Can I just get you to be precise about that? Does that mean that you will keep both employee contributions and employer contributions at the current rate, or does the Chancellor's pledge only mean that she will not?
Won't someone think of the companies?
They specifically said taxes on working people. So I think from a basic level of English comprehension, that wouldn't rule out increases the employer contributions from national insurance. But what I will say, whilst we're on the subject of not raising taxation on working people, in the run-up to the election, they did say, well, no tax rises for working people, income tax, national insurance, or VAT. And that's a lie. It's just straight up lie, because they are increasing income tax on working people. They're not increasing the rates that you pay on income tax. They're not increasing where the brackets are, but the value of those brackets, that's staying the same. So as inflation goes up, we'll get fiscal drag, which will increase the real terms taxation on working people. So unless they actually U-turn on what they said in the run-up to the election about income tax thresholds not moving with inflation, then they are going to be taxing working people more. What's that? A Labour politician lied about something? I don't believe you, No Justice.
But what the employer pays may still change.
Well, look, what we said in the election and what we stand by is that we won't be raising income tax, we won't be raising VAT, and we won't be raising national insurance. But as you say, we've got a big budget coming at the end of this month. Those matters are for the Chancellor. I'm not involved in those discussions, as you would expect that I wouldn't.
Neither is Keir Starmer, to be fair.
Look, we were elected on a mandate of change, and as I've been laying out, we are delivering that change through our legislative agenda. But we do face a difficult economic situation, and the Chancellor will
that's very helpful. So what I understand from what you've just said is that neither employee contributions nor employer contributions will go up. Can I ask you about one other thing? The motoring group.
Again, it's frustrating because if we had journalists who knew what the hell they were doing, the immediate response to that would be, okay, so you can't rule out an increase in employer contributions, but we'll see when it comes to the budget. But you've already committed to the fiscal track. So you literally, in that response that she gave, she specifically said, we are not going to raise income tax. She didn't say, we are not going to be raising the rate of income tax, which is what the kind of lines that you heard from Labour politicians during the election campaign, because that's true. They aren't going to be raising the rate of income tax. They're not doing that. But what they are doing is keeping the thresholds where they are, which is going to be fiscal drag. So she just lied. She just totally lied. They are raising income tax unless they U-turn massively.
The RAC has called on the government to reverse Rishi Sunak's 2022 cut in fuel duty, which is, I think, 5 pence, cost the Treasury about £2 billion a year. The RAC says that the energy companies aren't passing on the cut, and so motorists don't benefit. Energy companies are taking it as profit. Is that on the table?
That is 100% true. Economics 101, for people who aren't aware in chat, the price at which a commodity is bought and sold is based on one thing, and that's supply and demand. Where they sit on the supply and demand curve. If you cut a tax on something, like if you cut VAT on a product, it still sells at the same price because that's where the supply-demand curve meets. So if you cut the VAT on it, why would they make it lower? Why would they lower the price if you cut the VAT? Because people are still willing to pay the higher price. So they will just take it in profit. This is exactly what happens when you give subsidies to landlords, for example, like mortgage relief or negative gearing, like they have in Australia. People keep saying, we can't tax landlords more, they'll just put up the rent. I'm like, no, they won't. The price of the rent is supply and demand. It's where those things meet and the willingness to pay of the renters. So they won't do that. If you cut their taxes, or if you raise their taxes, the price will still stay the same. It just shows you how much profit they will end up making. These discussions about tax rises getting passed on to consumers is complete nonsense, because if consumers can't pay, because they can't afford to, because it's gone over their willingness to pay, they won't pay it.
I don't know is the honest answer, because I'm not involved in the budget decisions. You wouldn't expect me to come onto your programme and speculate about a budget because I would be purely speculating. These are matters for the Chancellor. She has done an incredible job in a very short period of time looking at the country's finances, and what she's found is appalling. And to just take the metaphor that you started off at the beginning of your programme with your Manchester music references, don't look back in anger. I'm afraid we do look back in anger at what the last government left to this government in the economic inheritance, and now we're faced with some really challenging choices.
Let me ask you about a decision that she's already made, which is to means test the winter fuel payment. When the Prime Minister said this week those with the broadest shoulders should bear the heaviest burden, was he talking about the 10 million pensioners who will lose that allowance?
They're opening themselves up to this. The optics of this is awful. The thing is that whilst the old people who are going to lose it, sure, lots of them probably weren't going to vote Labour anyway. Like, of course, they're trying to attack people outside of their voter base. But people who aren't old people, who aren't the elderly, right? We have grandparents, or we've had grandparents in some cases, of course, in sadder cases, right? But we've had grandparents. We know old people. We're not heartless bastards. We think this is terrible too. I get mad about this because I have this thing called compassion for people who aren't myself. Do you think that everybody else is not going to notice that their gran might be struggling because she can't heat her home, especially those who do caring for their elderly relatives? Do they think that people are just going to look at this and just go, well, it doesn't affect me, I don't care? Really?
Yeah,
I mean, that's what old people do. It's not what other people do.
It's not what normal people do, no.
Well, look, this is an example of one of the very difficult decisions that we've had to make, that we didn't want to make, that we weren't wanting to do when we got elected.
Well, you didn't have to make it.
What we have, but yes, we did, because
you didn't have to make this decision. These people who will lose that allowance are part of what the Prime Minister means as those with the broadest shoulders, those 10 million pensioners.
I thought he was actually going to respond by saying, well, no, you don't have to make this choice. You could have found savings elsewhere, maybe not on vulnerable pensioners, or by increasing taxes more on things that you not promised to freeze elsewhere. You could have done that, and you've not done. Like, stop trying to tell us this is not a political choice when it clearly was a political choice.
Well, exactly, because they're all of the opinion that austerity is the right way to go. It's just, should it be austerity on the rich or on the very, very poor?
The very, very poor are still going to get their winter fuel payment because they're on pension credit. But unless you're literally to the point of like destitution in old age, and also don't have to worry about having a mortgage payment, because apparently there's a large group of those people as well.
Oh, no, I just meant more generally, like in terms of this specific policy, yes. But the idea that actually we don't need to do austerity at all is not a thing that would ever enter their mind.
Well, exactly. You're 100%.
It's not a policy choice they would even consider.
Yeah. Even then, it's the group that are going to be most affected by this. People just above the threshold for pension credit.
Yep.
People who are just on the state pension. That's not a lot. We have a pretty bad state pension compared to most other countries of similar-sized economies. Our state pension isn't good. And imagine if you don't own your home. Imagine if you're a renting old person. Quite a lot of those people around. I know we talk about how rich pensioners are on this channel quite a lot. A quarter of them are millionaires after all. But that's because a lot of them have housing wealth. There's a lot of them who don't have housing wealth, who do rent, who don't get pension credit because they get the full state pension, who are getting screwed over. These are people really hit by this penalty. And as Trevor Phillips pointed out, right, are these really the people with, quote unquote, the broadest shoulders? Of course they're not. But it's a politically easy decision to make. It's not a tough decision. It's an easy decision because these people have no political power to punish you.
Yep.
What we found was that spending was much higher in this year, the current year that we are in, the deficit much higher, debt much higher than anybody had thought. There was a black hole of 22 billion, which was made up of things like nearly £7 billion underfunding on the asylum system that the previous government knew was there. They knew they had these things on their desk, and they put their head in their sand, and they didn't take the difficult decisions that they needed to take because they knew they were going to lose the election and it was going to fall to us to do. And that's why we've had to make some of these really difficult decisions around means testing the winter payment so that poorest pensioners continue to receive it.
There are plenty of poor pensioners who don't receive pension credit. There are plenty of people who have different levels of outgoing. It's such a ridiculous means test. Just make it universal and do a tax taper on the people at the top of the income threshold to claw the money back. It's so easy to do. It's frustrating, right? Because she's correct in saying that there was a massive overspend in the asylum system, right? This wasn't identified by the IFS before the election. This was something that only came to light once they were in government because it was compared to how much they told the OBR that they were going to spend, that then they had overspent in terms of eating into contingency funding, which was a lot of money. And this is why Jeremy Hunt is being investigated and why Jeremy Hunt should really and truly get totally up by this because he's an absolute charlatan because of it. But that doesn't mean that you have to go and attack pensioners because of it. You could literally get into government and say, we've found 6 billion worth of overspend that was not accounted for by the government, which means borrowing would otherwise be higher. And we told you we wouldn't borrow for day-to-day spending, so we're going to have to raise taxes to cover it. And you could do that, again, without touching any of the things they said they wouldn't cover. But they don't want to do that, do they? In fact, I believe fundamentally that they almost, first of all, gleefully want to cut this stuff because they've been banging on about it since 2014. Rachel Reeves literally in the Commons, in the Undersecretary for the shadow DWP, banging on about saying, well, we've got a true welfare reduction plan that beats the Conservatives. We're even more hawkish on this shit. Imagine Rachel Reeves being like that. Well, you've reheated that because you were desperate to do it a decade ago, reheating old beef. And on top of that, they just want to look like they're austere. They want to make a show that they can be trusted with the nation's finances under a household budget model, rather than blowing up the stupid household budget analogy in the first place and starting a new zeitgeist. But that's too hard for Morgan McSweeney's communication strategy. It's too hard to change people's minds. Why not allow the Murdoch media to dictate all policy to you and dictate the terms of the discussion, so we are living neoliberal austere hell forever?
Well, those who pay the piper call the tune, right? They put him into office. They're obviously going to extract their pound of flesh out of him. And he's got no backbone to ever stand up to them. So
the election's in 5 years. You have political capital, burn political capital for the public good. Tim Walz said this very well. We don't get into politics to create political capital. We get into power to burn political capital in the interest of the public. And they're not doing either.
We also are committed to the triple lock, which is going to see and has already seen pensions increase. And that means that pensions will increase by either average wages or inflation or 2%, whichever is the higher. And that's going to mean that the state pension is going to increase by hundreds, if not thousands of pounds over the course of this Parliament.
If I may say so, though, you are now government. You made a choice. And the first choice you've made was to withdraw the allowance from pensioners. In the same way as you've chosen to hand out pay increases way above inflation, while...
Jesus Christ. Yeah, let's pit pensioners against doctors.
They've done this to themselves, the Labour Party have.
Oh, God, yeah.
Literally, there was a caller, an old lady who called into the Jeremy Vine show going, well, if they've got money for the pay rises, but they've not got money for the winter fuel allowance, then they've taken that away from me to give it to them. Again, because household budget analogy makes you think in these very binary, they get what I used to have terms, because it's all done in terms of money in, money out, rather than as a broad kind of fiscal perspective. So they are allowing themselves, firstly, through the zeitgeist that they maintain of the household budget, and second of all, by doing these things at the same time, so that people will marry them up in their heads. It's such terrible optics. Like what McSweeney and McFadden pride themselves on being the electoral strategists and the rhetoricians and the people who are the masters of the optic positioning of the Labour Party to get them as an electoral fighting force, the natural party of government, and they haven't got a clue.
Yeah, they've gotten a majority, but it's the majority built on the flimsiest of votes. They haven't really done anything, and they're already down to a 4% lead over a dead political party.
Yeah, exactly. Like a political party who are currently having a leadership election that no one's talking about because that's how irrelevant they are.
You've been telling mothers with 3 children that they'll have to wait until you found the money to lift the benefit cap. These are your choices.
Look, as I say, finding in-year savings in the current year that you are in is very difficult indeed. And why we had to do that was because if we didn't, we would have seen the markets losing confidence, potentially a run on the pound, the economy crashing, and the people...
That's bollocks. Right, that is pure unmitigated bollocks, right? The savings that they made on the winter fuel payment, a couple of billion at most, right? If they just deficit spent that, I'm not saying that they should do, I'm not necessarily saying it would be the best economic plan that they could do, but let's just assume that they did deficit spend that. Would that have crashed the pound? That's nonsense. There is a far cry between a weekend of slash and burn tax cuts and expansionary increases in fiscal spending all at the same time over a weekend in which the Bank of England start quantitative tightening and putting up rates all at the same time to the tune of, £40 billion of unfunded tax cuts from Liz Truss and a couple of billion extra in deficit spending to be able to make sure that pensioners can heat their homes. There is a far cry between these things, and this idea that somehow a little bit of overspend is going to crash the pound. Why are they doing this? Why are they making the British public think that they can never do anything good, and if they do, the economy will collapse? All they're doing is putting themselves in a self-imposed straitjacket, and people will die because of it.
And the people who pay the heaviest price for that are not you and me, Trevor. The people who pay the heaviest price when the economy crashes are the poorest in society that do that. And people like pensioners who are on fixed incomes who see the value of their pension.
But the first thing you've done is withdraw
So that's why we had
from
to
those
take,
pensioners.
we've means tested a winter fuel payment, and that means we've had to take some of those difficult...
Also, again, this is what I mean about them having brought hook, line and sinker into the neoliberal framework, the way of thinking about it. Because she said there, when the economy crashes, the people get hurt most at the bottom. And without any hint that, as the government, you could do anything about that, or that you should want to do anything about that. They should be left to their own devices. We, the government, can't do anything to help them. It's the neoliberal thing. It's the shrinking the state as much as possible. The state should only be there to hand out military contracts, and that's about it.
Yeah, the paucity of imagination on what the role of the state could be. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.